Hey, I'm not going to spoil anything, don't worry, but I have a bit of a theory regarding the currently ongoing Egghead arc of One Piece. I don't think it's a particularly deep cut, all things considered, but I do have some good reasoning, and I think it's something people have been expecting for a long time. If you were around when Bad End Musical dropped, you might remember the fever pitch the fandom reached at the unclear fate of the Straw Hats for 2 whole weeks, and maybe some of the following backlash at the fake out afterwards. After striking at an intensely powerful group and going on a harrowing 30-chapter escape only to end with the thought of it having been for naught, was interesting to witness. In Wano, there was quite the publicized theory that the raid on Onigashima would fail, with all sorts of potential consequences in the fallout. I don't think it's a mean-spirited desire of wanting to see the Straw Hats lose, but more of a narrative expectation. Overcoming defeat and loss is something of a mainstay, the following victory all the sweeter. The crushing defeat at Sabaody led to the much-beloved Paramount War and some of the most powerful moments in the series, but we didn't get it at Whole Cake Island, we didn't get it at Wano, so why do I think it's happening now? Why Egghead? It's more of a question of structure, in particular the 3-act structure. Not because there aren't other structures that might be worth considering in regards to One Piece, I literally talked about the Kabuki act structure in my previous video. But it's more about what I think the structure accomplishes in its use, and how One Piece specifically takes that structure and runs with it in ways I've yet to see in anything else. And the most interesting point at which to view this aspect of the story is on Sabaody Archipelago, where the Straw Hats as a whole face their most significant loss in the story thus far. The first act of the arc is introductory. Kami, Hachi, and Duval lend themselves to the story as a window to the slave trade symptomatic of the latent systemic racism present at the heart of Saboody's conflict, and they also serve the rest of the arc as supporting characters in themselves. This intro of ideas is followed by the introduction to the setting proper, along with their rivals, the Supernovas, and the central antagonists, the Heavenly Dragons. It's only after we're privy to this key information when Kami is kidnapped, serving as the inciting incident for the arc and capping off Act 1 as the story shifts from its exploration to its conflict. Following this, the story advances to its first climax at the auction hall. Going by the 3-act structure, we hit another shift in the story with the lowest point. Hachi is wounded and soon to be enslaved, while Kami is no less captured despite efforts otherwise, the Straw Hats helpless to purchase her when trying to outbid a Heavenly Dragon. And this is where, structurally, things get interesting. The low point is defined as a moment of despair or failure for the protagonist when all seems lost, occurring at the end of Act 2 and serving as a part of the transition to Act 3. While this moment fits the bill, it's not really the lowest part of the arc, not emotionally. There's another moment that might stick out more for the failure it pushes onto the main characters. Thinking in terms of transitionary points, Hachi being shot and Kami's rescue slipping out of reach leads to Luffy punching Charlos and Rayleigh's intervention, both of which lead into the arc's 3rd act resolution. But it's not the lowest point of Sabaody by any stretch. Broadening the scope of it, in the 107 chapter stretch from the start of Sabaody Archipelago to Luffy putting up his hat on Ruxaina, I want to observe 6 different low points. In service of their individual arcs we have Sabaody's, Amazon Lilies, Impel Downs, and the Paramount Wars. Each one of these points marks a shift in the story, the recovery from these losses leading to the resolution of the conflict, in one way or another. But Sabaody and the war end tragically, these low points not in service of the arcs, but the greater story. Ace's death is Luffy's greatest failure, marking the end of Act 2 low point for the entire story. And the separation of the crew on Sabaody is the end of 2nd act low point for One Piece's Act 2 in itself. Amazon Lily works as the recovery from this low point, the shift in the story direction heading straight to the 3rd act of Act 2, the Paramount War, where the recovery from the failure at the war leads right into the time skip, the Act 3 of One Piece's story taking place in the New World. In using One Piece's act transitions as setting transitions, it continues to feed into the exceptional world of adventure that is the stage of One Piece as a story. The Grand Line itself may be a funnel for episodic arcs and iterative adventures, but the world itself lays out its act structure into the world. Reverse mountain the rising stakes of the peaceful East Blue going into the treacherous Grand Line, where the Red Line would become a wall the Straw Hats could not surmount, or at least not without overcoming their greatest failures. There's also another cute alignment in how One Piece's 3 main acts end with something resolutely matching Jump's iconic motto. Heading into the Grand Line, the Straw Hats proclaim their unity and dreams in a display of friendship. After their losses, they decide to train for 2 years, undergoing a strict routine of effort. And at the end of it all, they'll find their victory by discovering the One Piece. But while that's interesting and all, something else has always grabbed me about the 3-act structure. In the entire arc, it's actually quite vague or loose with exceptions in the low point and the ending. Sure, the inciting incident can be tragic, yes. Luke Skywalker loses his family before his worlds open up to the reaches of space. Ichigo watches Rukia offer herself to her captors before his world is changed to encompass realms beyond life. But that's not like a rule or anything. Harry Potter's induction into the wizarding world is freeing in its fantasy and wonder. But for a story to fit that 3-act structure, it's kinda supposed to have that low point and often a tidy resolution. Understanding structure as either a writer or reader is nice and all, and arming yourself with more structures can give you more tools to work with, as discussed in both Cynic Clinic's and Pause and Select's videos on the Kisho Tenketsu structure. But more than just a structure, they also discuss meanings, what they get out of their respective subjects when they apply the Kisho Tenketsu. That Kimi no Na wa is an example of a work that puts more emphasis on causality than character in what drives the conflict, or how Attack on Titan uses the ten, the twist, as a shift in perspective necessitates how characters, and possibly even the viewers, must grapple with new information and viewpoints. One of the things I get out of One Piece and the 3-act structure is the turning points which open up the world also matching the literal spaces on the planet the characters move within, with the observation regarding Jump's motto being perfectly fitting for its medium as a serialized Jump battle manga down to its structure. But my other angle hinges on that low point. In forcing the protagonist to deal with failure, stories that fit the 3-act structure inherently mean overcoming. Difficulty, sadness, loss. They have to suffer a defeat. In the case of One Piece, I read this as a narrative of overcoming not just the present, but of the past. On Enies Lobby, the Straw Hats have fought their way to the bridge, but their allies haven't lowered it yet, and still struggle against the apparently insurmountable world government. Robin is in sight, yet still refuses their aid in her desires for their safety. It's at this point we're given Robin's flashback, the narrative low point of the present matched with the emotional low point of the past. And through this link, the present conflict can only be resolved by addressing that past. Luffy won't help Robin until she asks for help, and Robin won't ask for help until she reconciles Saul's promise that she's not alone in the world. It's not in every arc, and it's not always in the same way, but this commonality even surfaces in Shell's Town, where we're given the Kuina flashback as Zoro's about to be shot to death by Marines, showing how much is riding on the life Luffy would come to protect. If you look for the flashback, you'll probably find the present struggle reaching a difficulty at around the same time. Sometimes it's after, Frankie's history with Tom and Water 7 being shown after Robin is whisked away and the Straw Hats are crushed while the threat of Aqua Laguna looms. Other times it's before, with the Fishman Island flashback being followed by Hody Jones proclaiming his usurpation of the throne. And it doesn't always happen, Brook's solo performance being well after the climax of the arc, but considering Arlong Park, Skypiea, Dressrosa, Whole Cake Island, and Wano, it's common enough that I think it's an apt observation. But these tragedies aren't for wallowing in the sadness of, they're there to push everything to a happier ending, the happiness only being achieved after overcoming sadness. Going back to the original dilemma, we can't discuss the low points of the crew without considering how One Piece uses them in its narrative structure, especially after recognizing how layered these 3 acts are in the series. The Straw Hats suffering major defeats at the end of Whole Cake Island or Wano could have been dramatic, but it also would have invited an ill-timed shift in the story to its ending, towards the 3rd act of Act 3 that is the New World. They do have their losses in these arcs, but these low points are often in service of the arcs themselves, not always in the 3rd act of the story that is the New World. With Otis saying the story is heading to its end, I should have honestly come to this realization sooner than I did, which was around that, and that. With all this in mind, I imagine anyone caught up with the manga could likely wrangle some theories themselves on how the New World's act structure might shake out. If Law kicking the gears of the age and emotion is the inciting incident for Act 3, and Egghead our end of Act 2 low point, what kind of defeat will they suffer? How will they recover from it? And whatever happens, I'm fucking terrified to find out.